Okay, hello and welcome everybody to this third event in the autumn seminar of PHO2, the joint research seminar of the Center for Philosophical Studies of History and the Center for the Philosophy of Historiography. My name is Georg Gangl and I will be today's moderator. More importantly, today's speaker will be Ephraim Wallach with the topic, Is this real? Question mark, two remarks on the realism of the past. Ephraim is a lecturer in philosophy at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in Israel. His main research interests lie in the philosophy of the historical sciences and the philosophy of history and historiography. Of Ephraim's many publications in these fields, I only want to mention two here. One is the article Time Will Tell Against Anti-Realism About the Past, which came out in 2022 in the journal General Philosophy of Science. And then this autumn only, Ephraim published the text Determination, Overdetermination, and Underdetermination in the Historical Sciences, which came out in the Bloomsbury Handbook of the Philosophy of the Historical Sciences and Big History, which was edited by David Černín and Abiesa Tucker at the Center for the Philosophy of Historiography, and which I have here as a printed copy. So if you're interested, you may as well get it for yourself or for your library. It's fresh off the press. Now, after today, we will still have two more events in our autumn seminar. First, in about 2 weeks already, on December 18, we will have Fons de Wolf from Hong Kong University of Science and Technology speaking about reading in historiography and iterative measurement, atheism, forgery, cannibalism, and deification. And then finally, on January 28th of next year, we will have Hermann Paul from the University of Leiden speaking on epistemic success in historical studies, truth, truthfulness, and true again. Now, our motto is after the seminar is before the seminar. So we already started planning our spring seminar. So if you would like to speak in our spring seminar, or you would like to see somebody really speak, then please let us know and we will try to arrange that. Now, if you want to stay updated about our activities, please follow our social media of both centers. There, all information about our seminar series and other events are published in a timely manner. Now, finally, just a few technicalities. Please mute yourself during Ephraim's talk, just to avoid any unnecessary disturbance. After the talk, there will be a discussion session that I will moderate. The talk should take about roughly 45 minutes. In the discussion session, please first, if you want to have a comment or question, concern, please first raise your digital hand. I will make a speakers list. When it's your turn, you can either speak up with or without your camera on, or you can write your question in the chat and I will read it out loud. And we will prioritize people who haven't spoken yet. Okay, that was it from me. Thank you very much, Ephraim. Please.
Thank you for the introduction and for inviting me to talk here. I would like, just a moment. And I also need, is this visible? Is my scene visible?
Not yet.
Oh, this is, and now? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, just let me add one more thing, which is spotlight that I might get used. Okay, so thank you again. And the subject of realism and anti-realism of the past was discussed and debated by many scholars for many aspects and points of view. Here are just few examples, and there are many more. I would like to add in this talk a modest contribution to this matter by positing and defending two claims. The first is that, contra some distinguished opinions, the inaccessibility of the past doesn't warrant, is not a good way to justify anti-realism about the past. And the second, that underdetermination of the past, of hypotheses about the past, does warrant some form of anti-realism of the past, but a confined and restricted one, as shall be explained later. What does it mean to be a realist about the past? I am following a scheme used by Ayan Chakravarti and Stathis Psilos in various versions for general scientific realism. namely to be realist about the past, is to affirm three claims. The first is a metaphysical claim that the past existed mind-independently, independent of us and our thoughts and our knowledge. Then the semantic claim that we can formulate meaningful, truth-up proposition about the past, about past events, entities, circumstances, and like. And then the epistemic claim that we can use, and we do use, information signals, what sometimes called traces, to support or rebut hypotheses about the past, to determine which hypothesis about the past, if any, is more likely to be true. It is generally accepted that this scheme is hierarchical, namely if one accepts that any of the lower claims, one is already committed to the upper ones, but not the other way around, and also that it can be construed partially. One can be realist or non-realist, anti-realist about few things in the past and not others. For example, the Turner ones argued for anti-realism about prehistory and not the written history. So my first topic is about anti-realism from inaccessibility, the claim for anti-realism from inaccessibility. I shall mention several versions of arguments that raised for anti-realism of the past for its undeniable inaccessibility, and then introduce and define a specific sense of chronology and chronological statement, and go on to ask if one can be anti-realist about such statements. I shall argue that this is only possible under a very steep cognitive price, under commitments that most people will not be ready to accept, and that if one is not anti-realist about chronology in this sense, one cannot be anti-realist about the past, at least not as far as its accessibility is concerned, or rather that one should not use the past's inaccessibility as an argument for anti-realism. Michael Dumet, a prominent British philosopher from the second half of the 20th century, maintains that only those statements about the past are true, the assertion would be justified in light of what is now the case. Statements about the past, which cannot be thus justified, most of them obviously, exactly because the past is out of reach, are not false in his opinion. They are meaningless. They have no truth value at all. And if the realist object, Dumet would answer that what the realist would like to do is to stand in thought outside the whole temporal process and describe the world from a point which has no temporal position at all. At one time, Dumet also was ready to entertain the thought of gaps in reality, gaps in the reality of the past, because the things that he allowed as justification, vivid memories, and later also some reliable testimonies, obviously do not cover most of the past. So he admitted the idea of gaps in reality, which other philosophers criticized as incoherent. Leon Goldstein had no problem with the metaphysical, mind-independent reality of the past, nor with the possibility to formulate truth-up proposition, meaningful proposition about the past. But looking at the way in which historians do their work, he concluded that the real past is not relevant to the account or description or construction that historians produce, and the realistic assumption that the historical truth is a concordance of the historian's account with the real past that it was when it was present cannot be made to work, exactly because the past is inaccessible. We never confront the real past. So this is a very stringent epistemic anti-realism. To conclude this part, I shall mention briefly two opinions that argued for anti-realism of the past from its non-manipulability, which is an aspect of the past inaccessibility. Derek Turner pointed out that obviously we cannot change the past, while we can use technology to manipulate things and events at the microphysical level. And this for him was part of the justification, the argument for anti-realism, or at least agnosticism about the reality of the past. And Ian Hacking's famous maxim, if you can praise them that they are real, obviously exclude all of the past from the realm of reality. Now for the chronology. For the purpose of our talk, chronological statement is defined as any specification of temporal values as a relative or absolute to information signals in present entities. Please note that this is unrelated to and different from the way chronology is used in the narrativistic literature, nothing to do with Dante's ideal chronicler or Louis Mink's distinction between chronology and history. This is something different. But such chronological statements abound in the historiographic literature. They are all over the sciences of the past. Here are few examples picked up at random. I shall not repeat them, they are just for illustration purpose, but note that the first two are relative chronological statements. They mention a duration of time, a span of time, or the order between things. And the second two are absolute ones, they mention dates. Even if such statements do not explicitly speak about information signals in present entities, this is what they are about. The only justification, if they have any, is from the analysis of such information signals. Chronological statements are not only frequent, but they are often crucial for historiography. Being the arbitrators, so to speak, the arbitrators of acceptability for hypotheses about the past, often establishing hypotheses about the past as credible, implausible, plausible, or impossible, according to how they agree or not with some chronological determination. Two brief examples to illustrate this. The work of Peter Ward at the Bay of Biscay helped to convince many paleontologists for the Alvarez impact hypothesis when he showed that all genera of ammonites disappear more or less abruptly at the border of the Cretaceous. And Kathleen Kenyon work at the 60s, she excavated the mound of Jericho and showed that the famous walls of Jericho indeed existed and indeed fell down, but this happened several centuries before Joshua and the Israelite tribes had a chance to be there, and this necessitated a reassessment not only of the site itself, but of much more. And there are more such examples all over the historiography. So chronological statements are frequent and they are important. What does it mean to be realist about them? Simply to accept that well-supported chronological statements are likely to be true or approximately true. To be anti-realist or non-realist about chronological statements is to deny Seibar and maintain that chronological statements do not inform us anything about the temporal provenance of traces, about the original times of the signals in traces. As far as I can see, there are but two ways to be anti-realist about chronology, two options. The first is to maintain that chronological statements are systematically misleading, they are all false. And the second, to hold that they are empty. There may be a convention perhaps that we use if we wish to organize our data, but has no empirical content. And I am going to argue that both of these options are possible, but at a very steep cognitive price, so to speak. At some commitment involving commitments that most people will not ready to accept, because the first is just a form of an extreme skepticism, and the second converges to extreme anti-realism, not only about the role of science, but much of our everyday perceptions as well. To say that chronological statements are misleading and systematically misleading is but a version of the famous paradox by Bertrand Russell. Nothing can disprove the hypothesis that the world began 5 minutes ago or 5 centuries ago or whatever. More than a century before Bertrand Russell wrote these words, a similar argument was used by religious fundamentalists, in this case not ironically and not paradoxically, to salvage, so to speak, the story of Genesis, that the world was created about 6,000 years ago, or over 6 days. It is sometimes called the Omphalian hypothesis, from Greek omphalos for navel, because among other things, it implies that Adam and Eve, not born to a woman, were created with their navels. Anyhow, any such form of such stance is a radically skeptic one. And like any radically skeptic opposition, it cannot be disproved, neither logically nor empirically, but there is no reason to accept it. And in fact, several of the scholars I just cited specifically, explicitly spoke against it. Other commitments are involved in maintaining that chronological statements in historiography are empty. And it is worthwhile to look at how chronological statements are arrived at, how are traces stated. There are many methods, of course, only few are illustrated here. Some are quite veteran. Already in the 16th century, linguistic analysis of Latin was used to show that the document called the Donation of Constantine was a forgery. When Cuvier analyzed the stratigraphy of the Ile-de-France, the method was already more generation old. And there are newer ones like redshift and genetic profiling and radiometrics. What is common to all those methods and others is that they are theory-laden and the results are defeasible, but they are no more theory-laden or defeasible than any other scientific evaluation. They are no more suspect than determining the specific weight or the distance to anything or whatever. Specifically, the inaccessibility of the past plays no role here, because the signals are accessible, even though the information is about something in the past. It actually goes a little deeper than this, because some methods of chronological assessments are based primarily on the assumption that events follow their course. Something that we all accept, that is part of our mundane epistemology, so to speak. For example, the law of superposition, which is the basis of stratigraphy, is based on the notion that other things being equal, upper strata were deposited later than lower ones. One sometimes get even absolute dates from dendrochronology, counting tree rings, because inner tree rings were formed before the outer ones. In a sense, the inner tree rings are part of the causal template, nexus for the outer ones. And just last fine example, when those coins were found beneath the floor of a Roman villa excavated, I think, near London, this bracketed the chronology not only of the building, but also the timing for the emperor's visit to the island and the initiation of the Hadrian Wall. So if chronological statements are empty, so is much else that we believe to know. And unless one is ready to embrace such a stringent form of anti-realism or maybe positivism, one must accept that justified chronological statements about extant and inaccessible signals provide knowledge about, and through it in a testimony for, inaccessible past event and circumstances. Through chronological statements, we latch, so to speak, into the past, puncture the veil of inaccessibility of the past. And if this is correct, then the inaccessibility of the past, even though it is a popular argument, is not a good argument for anti-realism about the past. We can latch from the present to the past in a way that it is difficult to avoid. This doesn't mean that the realism of the past is unassailable. There are other considerations, other things to involve, and I want now to turn to one of them, which is the argument for anti-realism of the past from underdetermination of hypotheses or theories about the past. I shall review two versions of claims for anti-realism of the past from underdetermination, and then introduce and exemplify two instances of cases where, in my opinion, underdetermination of hypotheses about the past indeed threatens a realism perception of the past. The first will be related to human intentionality, and the second to what I shall call and define later unknown unknowns. I shall conclude by saying something on the merit of underdetermined hypothesis. A note first, we are talking about, we are concerned with contrastive underdetermination, not the Duhem-Quine type, namely the situation where we have several competing hypotheses about something about the past, and the totality of available evidence, together perhaps with other considerations, do not suffice to determine which, if any of them, is distinctly likely to be true. Only when this situation is deemed to be permanent does it warrant anti-realism. This, I think, was already discussed by Laudan, but here is a newer citation from Samir Okasha. It is only the empirical equivalence of two incompatible theories. It is not the empirical equivalence of two incompatible theories, but rather their undecidability by all possible evidence, current and future, that threatens realism. So are the sciences of the past vulnerable? Are this worry of permanent contrastive underdetermination relevant to historiography? At least two scholars thought that it is. Derek Turner again, permanent local underdetermination is more pervasive in the historical than in experimental science. This, for him, at least initially, clearly implied that we will never have any historical evidence that could adjudicate the dispute between metaphysical realists and social constructivists. Later, Turner modified his position, altered his position somewhat. Okay, everyone agrees that we have quite a lot of knowledge about prehistoric life, and presumably everybody also agrees that there is much that we will never know. This is a double change here, double transformation. First, from a total or pervasive underdetermination to a partial, maybe a patchy or fragmentary one about some things and not about others. And with it, a transformation from a talk about metaphysical anti-realism to a justification perhaps for epistemic anti-realism, because here we are talking about what we know and what we will never know, and not about what there was. At about the same time, Carl Stanford suggested another form of underdetermination with implication to realism, and this is underdetermination by unconceived alternatives, namely the situation where scientists have what they regard as a good hypothesis or a theory, well justified and adequately supported, and later come to abandon it and supersede it with some other hypothesis that was not even conceived initially. Only when this situation of transit determination is recurrent, does it undermines our justification for believing present theories, so long as we have some reason to think that it is also indeed recurrent and should happen again and again and again. Stanford didn't speak specifically about the sciences of the past, but his characterization to what theories or hypotheses are most vulnerable, in his opinion, included those who are founded on eliminative, justified by eliminative, at some other place he say abductive reasoning, and those who are about remote or inaccessible domains of nature. Both of these characterizations suits well to at least many hypotheses about the past. So, are the aspects of the past that are likely to suffer from permanent or recurrent underdetermination? The question is only interesting, I think, if we are talking about substantial aspects of the past. I shall not try to define here what substantial is. It may be even a question of something subjective. But obviously, we are interested to know, for example, how and when were galaxies formed, not how many atoms there were at each galaxy at each time, not know exactly how many times Napoleon took a shower on the way to Moscow and the like. The question is pertinent if it refers to things that if we understand them one way or another, it changes our perception of some understanding of something about the past. And are there such aspects of the past? I venture to suggest that if they are not necessarily the currently recognized conundrums, things that we now recognize as very difficult problems, like, for example, the origin of life on Earth, that seems perhaps intractable and strongly underdetermined, with many opinions. But such problems may perhaps be resolved later in some way that we do not envision, do not think of it now. And I want to give just one example how this is happening before our eyes, so to speak. The problem of the origin and evolution of Indo-European languages and populations was underdetermined for more than 2 centuries. There were always several hypotheses, and the combined work of archaeologists and linguistic scholars and others couldn't converge to one stable and adequately justified consensus. It was underdetermined. This is now changing in these very years. The application of methods that couldn't perhaps have been imagined several decades ago, namely the genetic analysis of long deceased organisms, both human and others, seems to dispel at least part of the conundrum. So if there are aspects, substantial aspects of the past that are likely to suffer from permanent or recurrent underdetermination, this must stem from more basic reasons. And I shall offer now 2 such considerations. This is by no means intended to be an exclusive or comprehensive list. I'm sure there are other ones, but I shall concentrate on these 2. The first is related to human intentionality. Intentional and cognitive states of past individuals play a crucial role in hypotheses about human history. Not only about human history, when we talk about domestication, for example, events of domestication, the intentional and cognitive states of past individuals are part of the story. However, reports about intentions and thoughts of past actors, if available at all, are partial and often biased. This is not original, of course. It goes back at least as far as Collingwood, but Collingwood, our appraisal of their motives may be misleading, may be wrong, and often probably is. And consequently, some substantial aspects of the human past may be irreparably, permanently underdetermined. And here is one example, which, in my opinion, shows us how this is indeed the case. Of course, not all hypotheses and all notions about human past are underdetermined or permanently underdetermined. We know why, for example, the Pope Urban II, what were his motivations for calling for crusades at Clermont and the like, but some are. And here is one example. Cognitive archaeology is a discipline that seeks to infer mental, cognitive, and cultural aspects of the prehistoric human from their material remains. Questions explored are, for example, the evolution of stone tools. Why did it take a full million years from the old one to Julian technology? What, if anything, initiated the transformation? The mental underpinning of rock and cave art, the emergence of human musicality. Is this perforated bone, was it a flute? And what was the motivation there? Last but not least, for these examples, the cognitive capabilities of Neanderthals. Look, this seems to be a construction made from stalagmites and stones found within a Neanderthal cave. Was it intentionally constructed? If so, why? All those problems, I think you should agree, are substantial. We would like to be there to know the answers. And cognitive archaeology is a serious endeavor, is a serious science. When one looks in the literature, one finds many interesting, inspiring ideas, a lot of top-scale, careful, empirical work, and many lively debates. What is rare to find are consensuses. Some of these questions and others are debated ever since the field began more than half a century ago. And scholars, both scientists and philosophers who are interested in cognitive archaeologies, sometimes offer rationalization why it is so and why perhaps it shall remain so. Here are some. One is lack of interpretive theories, aka mid-range theories. Supporting middle-range theories linking remains to cognitions is often difficult. This may be an understatement. Both of these things are the creations of Neanderthal, but while we have ample resources to understand why and how was this piece of wood polished and sharpened and hafted, it is not so about such a construction. Related to this is the fact that when we speak about the cognition of anybody, we necessarily make recourse to mental models or simply psychological theories, and those are also debated, and different background commitments of competing models will produce different results. One more or less perennial debate is about the acquisition of skills. Did the work on this, the capping of the work on this or other technology of stone tools, did it necessitate a mental template or simply an associational learned procedure? And last but not least, when we speak about the cognition of hominins, we necessarily do this from the vantage point of our own cognition, our own evolved capabilities, and our intuition is maybe a poor guide, maybe misleading. Our intuition, for example, for why were such figures so prevalent in the Upper Paleolithic may be misleading, and different people, in fact, have different informations. So it is not surprising to find opinions, for example, like this. In the end, we might have to live with the fact that eventually we will have a small class of candidates explanation for a given trait and no further mean to decide between them, which is nothing else than a state of permanent underdetermination. A different source of underdetermination, which may have an influence on the possibility of realistic appreciation of something in the past, is related to Stanford recurrent underdetermination, but in our case, not so much or not only from unconceived alternatives, but also from unconceived problems, things that are not pursued because we never come to think about them. I borrowed the name unknown unknowns from Donald Rumsfeld, but for our purpose, the purpose of our talk, unknown unknowns are a past event or circumstances or processes characterized by missing or severely dampened original signals and a significant causal influence. As Xavier Tucker observed, there are generally more causes and origins because each state of the universe holds its next state, but information signals that origin transmit are lost to equivocation and mixture with noise, and consequently there are natural limits to our knowledge of the past. And again, we are not bothered about any minor limitation of our knowledge, but when it gets to things that have had or might have had significant causal influence, this may unsettle our understanding. The long hand of unknown unknowns becomes apparent when they fortuitously, accidentally, surprisingly become known, when something is emerges that indeed force reassessment of some significant part of our understanding about something in the past. And here are two examples how this happens. The first you are all acquainted with, the genetic analysis of a single finger bone found amid many human remains and human artifacts within a cave in the wall, led to the identification of a formerly unknown human species, now called the Denisovans. This initiated further searches, and few other exemplars, not too many by the way, were found in museum specimens and the like. So the original signals was indeed dampened, very weak. It is by no means certain that the discovery was inevitable. It could have been lost. But the phenomenon was not marginal. It is now recognized that the species existed for 250,000 years over much of Europe and Asia, inbred with both modern humans and Neanderthals. So something here that became known and led to some reassessment. And indeed, sometimes people who work on human phylogenetics say that they, in my world, they may be full of cases of unknown unknowns. Here are Bernard Wood and Richard Smith, two eminent paleontologists, one British, one American. The hominin fossil record should be seen for what it is, an incomplete record of human evolutionary history that limits what we said about, should be said about it, because many things may be unknown and we do not even know that we should look for them, and generated narratives, or what I would like to call hypotheses, should be treated more as a heuristic device and not as an accurate and comprehensive description of past event. My second example is probably less familiar. The place where I live in is arguably the most densely excavated and archaeologically researched sliver of land in the globe, but surprises happen. And the creation of a new highway to Jerusalem necessitated a rescue excavation, which exposed the remain of a temple. This is a full-size temple, not a shrine, not a home sanctuary. And it existed less than 2 hours walk from where the Temple of Solomon is said to have existed, the Temple Mount, and over the same time, over several centuries. So this is something that must have had a significant influence ideologically, religiously, politically perhaps, maybe even economically. But nothing was known about it because the Bible was written by the victors. People didn't expect it, and they come out asking, what else we don't know? And again, the discovery was a lucky one because incidentally the place was kept as an agricultural plot at subsequent generation, and therefore the remains were not totally obliterated. It was possible to expose it. The problem of unknown unknowns as characterized and defined here is specific to the historical sciences. Theoretical sciences do not bother about tokens, but tokens can unsettle historiography. Therefore, it restricts the scope of epistemic realism about the past. It's a possibility to say that some of our best hypotheses or theories are sufficiently justified. But this restriction is not a global one, not homogeneous over all the sciences of the past. We do not expect, for example, anything unknown to emerge about the evolution of the beginning of the solar system, or the Crusades, or the geology of the Himalayas. So some things are more vulnerable than others, some aspects of the past, but at the moment I am not in the position to say anything more definitive about it. But if the above is correct, then we must accept that some of our best and most interesting hypotheses about the past shall be permanently or recurrently underdetermined, and in this sense be speculative not in the Spengel-Toynbee sense, but because they will never be sufficiently justified. But this doesn't mean that such hypothesis or question should be avoided. They have merit. They point to further research. Like in the examples here, they may lead to new discoveries. They tend to become progressively richer and more coherent through the debates, even if consensus and determination is never reached. And one may never know. There is always a chance. So, in this talk, it comes to conclusion. I try to convince you in 2 claims. The first is, even though the argument isn't, at least wasn't, probably is popular, the inaccessibility of the past shouldn't be used to justify anti-realism about the past. It is a poor justification. And second, that underdetermination of hypotheses about the past indeed restricts the scope of epistemic realism, but in a specific way, not a global one. So thank you for listening.
Great, thank you very much, Ephraim. We now, of course, have the discussion session. So let's begin. Is there anybody who wants to go first? Question, comments, concerns, criticism?
So well, I've managed to make myself visible. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, right. So thank you very much for the talk, which is really interesting. I agree, although I'm not not exactly a realist. I agree on many of the things that you say. I've got two questions. So one is about, I suppose, I guess that I do agree with you that there is a lot of ground for optimism about the ability of the historical sciences to gain knowledge. And the case of the Denisovan girl, shows how much can be known from how little. However, and this is my first question, is how optimist are you in terms of what you've called cognitive archaeologists, so of the ability to proceed on the basis of the methods which is at work in historical sciences like paleontologies, to infer questions, for example, about cultures. It seems to me that there are certain things that can be inferred. So if we look at sort of the remains that can be found in the stomach of an animal or a past human, then we might infer what sort of diet they had and whether maybe they were hunter-gatherers or not. It seems to me that there are other things for which there is a kind of principal barrier, and for which you don't just need more evidence which you have not already had, so more fossils that you have not bumped into, but rather you need some form of historical record that tells you about their ways of life, about their beliefs, about their practices. Now, there may be practices that are shared by all humans, but on the other hand, there are some which are sort of very culturally specific. So my first question is, while there is ground for optimism about having knowledge about the past and historical sciences, it seems to me it's very much true, and there is such knowledge, and we've got we shouldn't be skeptic about it, but how optimistic are you about then adopting this method and to acquire knowledge that is of a different kind? Yeah. So what I would say is that the traces that the past leaves are sometimes very, very different in kind, and the traces that we find in a scroll or in a document are quite different from the traces that can be gathered by DNA analysis or something like that. That was my first question. The other is about the realism-idealism debate. I mean, isn't there a sense in which perhaps instead of arguing about whether the past is real or is not real, we could just leave this debate behind? Not because in a way, when one analyzes what is it that a historical scientist does as a philosopher, one is looking at the kind of methods that they're using and describing those methods in order to, and the evidence that they use in order to establish certain conclusions. But then, whether the past is real or not real is a sense, it's not something that can be established by the scientific method or by any other method. In a sense, it's a presupposition that is being made. So, I do wonder whether, in a way, when we are trying to say that the past is real in this sense, we are taking, sides in a kind of unanswerable metaphysical debate. And although I'm not a logical positivist, and I noticed that sometimes I think you clustered anti-realism with positivism. I would say I'm not a positivist. I'm not even sure that I am an anti-realist. I'm not a realist, but I'm not sure I am an anti-realist. But what I would say is that do we need to engage in that debate in order to claim, look, yeah, there is objectivity in the historical sciences. We can have knowledge, but we don't really need to take sides in that debate. And sort of sometimes when I look at that debate, Aya comes to mind when he says, you can decide whether it's raining outside or not, but there is no point in sort of keeping on asking whether the rain is real or ideal. Yeah, sorry, so I took too long, but those were my two questions. One is about how optimist you are about the adoption of methods which are used in the historical sciences to say something about cultures in cognitive archaeologists. And the other is, where do you want to position yourself? Do you want to say, I want to take a side in the idealist-realist debate, or whether you think that in a way, you can make the claims that you want to make, but without sort of, bypassing that kind of metaphysical sort of to and fro the questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. First, about cognitive archaeology, I'm not a scientist working on the field, and even not, I read much of it, and my observation is that I agree with you that in many things that there is no lack of experimental traces. Now, multitude of stone tools, for example, and what is lacking is understanding of things that are related to cognition and culture. And my observation is that few things are maybe more or less determined, but most of the debates fail to reach a conclusion, and interesting ideas emerge all the time. Things that are more liable to perhaps determinations are sometimes called the minimal capacity problems. For example, if what I showed is a flute, yes, a musical instrument, this says something about the capacity of the people who used it to generate music, to appreciate music. Much more we do not know. We do not know. We can speculate on their motivations and how did it evolve, but this will be speculative. So some things can be perhaps something one can be optimistic about, but many in this field not. This at least is my observation for what I read. As I said, people who work in this field sometimes opine that the situation will remain so. About the realist idealist debate, at least as far as I'm concerned, I am metaphysically a realist. I am absolutely sure that the solar system was created, say, some 4.5 billion years ago, the age of the Earth, and things that once was completely unknown and unimagined. I think we have a good knowledge to know it, and as far as I can see, there is no reason to say maybe it was not real. There's also a problem if you say that the past is not real. Where do you place the limit? Prehistory, the written history, maybe 2 days ago. So metaphysically, at least I'm a realist, and also semantically. But as when it comes to epistemic realism, I am only partially optimistic. I believe that some things will never approach sufficient determination. Hope this answers your question.
All right, thank you.
We got now first Jouni-Matti, then Avi, and then perhaps me, or perhaps others if there are others before me. First Jouni-Matti, please.
Hi, hello. Thanks a lot for your talk. It was very informative. I think I will continue Josie's other question, or my question deals with similar topics. So I'm actually also wondering kind of semantics of real versus anti-real. So what does it mean actually when we say X is real or X is anti-real or unreal? Is there a simple answer? Okay, I'll stop here and maybe I can elaborate then. If say something is real, what does it mean?
What does it mean? In my opinion, it means simply that it exists or existed, have existed. For example, the table before me is real, and so was some table at Pompeii that is now for which we now have only some remains.
Okay, I'd like to continue
but-
because, yeah.
Yeah.
So, your table is real. What does it mean? Because it's basically repeating the same. But maybe I elaborate and then we can come back to. So, what I'm wondering here is that the issue between anti-realism and realism is not really about evidence. Anti-realists, most of them anyway, also believe in evidence, and they commit to the statements, assert the statement about science and about everyday life and about history and so on, which are supported, which are warranted by evidence, also by other forms of reasoning. So I don't think that, as far as I'm concerned, the real debate is the real sticking point is to do with evidence, or what is claimable, what is believable. So there were some authors earlier, like Arthur Fine, who defined sometimes when realist says, this is so really, the world exists really, and so on. He called it as desk thumping and foot stamping shout really, meaning that there's the statement, and adding it that it's really real doesn't really add anything. And that's what I'm asking. It's a similar point that was put forward by, I think, Simon Blackburn. He was relying on Frank Ramsey's idea of deflationarism, dealing with what is true, what is fact, what is real. So when you say that something is real or fact or true, most of the time you're just affirming the statement you stated anyway. And the real philosophical work is done by the question whether we should state the initial statement. So, so my worry is that it doesn't really distinguish in terms of what realists and anti-realists believe, but realists want to add something metaphysical on it, and the metaphysical is unnecessary and also philosophically not necessarily justified. And then, okay, there would be further debates, further issues, but I think what would be interesting, but maybe I stop here and like to, keen to hear your answer.
I don't know. I opened this talk by showing several aspects of several examples to treatises about the realism of the past, and then say that I want to make a modest contribution to it by arguing the 2 points I did argue, namely that the inaccessibility is not a good argument for anti-realism, and underdetermination may be. I'm aware of all of this spasm, so to speak, between realist and anti-realist. I'm aware of it, and I just want to, it is not part of my talk here, and my personal naive observation perhaps is that this gap is maybe unbridgeable. Maybe it is related to state of mind, and if it is difficult to make a realist convinced for anti-realism or the other way around. I may be wrong, but I agree with you. It is not about evidence for what we have, and about how we perceive what conclusion we derive from this evidence, and this is left to, in some sense, is left to. There is a freedom of options here. But this big question of realism is not a part of my talk here. It's not something I would like to be drawn into.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Okay, next is Avi, and then perhaps me. We'll see.
Okay.
Hi.
Hello.
Let me just try to make some distinctions that may help clarify what I think is going on here. So first, there are three types of debates about realism and anti-realism. There's the ontological, the linguistic, and the epistemic. The ontological debate, I think, is largely the result of confusion between epistemology and metaphysics. Because to be a metaphysical anti-realist about the past, it's not about not knowing whether the black box of the past has a cat that is alive or dead, but that the past is Schrödinger's cat. It's a superposition, that there wasn't just one past, but that there were many possible pasts and they all existed. A realistic interpretation of multiple universes about the past, which I don't think any of the people who say that who claim to be anti-realist about the past really think that the past is Schrödinger's cat. There's no fact of the matter. There's not one. It's not that there was one past, but there were multiple pasts, and that's why it's all unrealistic. So that I think is basically a result of confusion. I think most people, if they really think about it, unless they're somehow committed to some weird version of quantum physics, they would agree that the past was real. Then there's the semantic debate, and that's, I think, Adam Timmins is somewhere in the background here. So he may have more to say about the semantics of it, but the debate about the semantic got separated from the debate about epistemology. And that's, I think, to a large extent, the result of Damit's work, who started up with a verificationist concept of language and then saying then statements about the past do not have verification conditions, so they are meaningless, and anti-realism follows. And then he came up with a solution, which is a semantic solution, but makes actually the epistemic problems even worse, saying that what historians mean when they write about the past is, had there been an observer at some point in the past, this is what the observer would have seen, which is wrong for two reasons. First, historians often would not be able to say what an observer would have seen. There's not enough information for that. And secondly, a lot of slow processes that took place in many places at the same time, let's say the Industrial Revolution, there was nothing to observe. They could observe some items of it. Then we come to the epistemic debate. And the epistemic debate, I think, again, we should divide it between the status of what historians think they know and the status of what historians don't know or is underdetermined. And the ground for realism are much stronger, I think, about what historians think of what they know because of an optimistic induction. That is the opposite of the pessimistic induction in the hard sciences. In physics, a pessimistic induction is that everything that we thought we knew about physics was proven wrong sooner or later. Sooner or later, what we think we know today about physics will also be proven wrong, if for no other reason, because physics is internally incoherent right now. On the other hand, historiography so far has been an entirely progressive science. We know today more about history than we knew 20 years ago, and 20 years ago we knew more than we knew 40 years ago. And since Ranke and Darwin and Lyell in geology, this has all been accumulated knowledge. There's nothing today of any substance that we would say, oh, about this Ranke was wrong. Ranke just was mistaken about something. Or that Darwin was mistaken about something, or Lyell. So the optimistic induction gives a much greater strength to the argument for historiographic realism than for physical realism. Then there's what you were talking about, which is the underdetermination of some hypotheses, what we don't know, and what we are not sure whether we will be able to know, and there, of course, there's a case for anti-realism in terms of what is the status of this underdetermined hypothesis, that the probabilities, and for me, of course, everything in the end is probability, the probabilities attached to each one of those underdetermined hypotheses are too low to consider them knowledge of the past. And here, I mean, I don't really have a question, I guess it was more of a comment, but maybe you want to comment on the comment or just move on.
I fully agree with what you said. I just want to add as a note that Hilary Putnam once criticized, talked about Dumet idea of the would-be observer, and what you said, something a potential observer, and said he attacked it from a different point. He said once you say something that you are talking about something that nobody observed, you are no longer an anti-realist. You lose all the force of non-realism. And I agree that with all the greatness of Michael Dumet, this idea was incoherent. But everything else you said is, I think, compatible with what I said and much more. Thank you.
Okay, maybe I'll ask a question. I don't see a hand at the moment. And then maybe others come up, can think about some questions in between. I have several questions, but let me start with just a conceptual question. You were speaking about, what was it? To be a realist about the past. Do you make a distinction, or would it be useful to make a distinction between the past and history? I'm not sure what history exactly is, but realism about the past often reminds some people about the philosophy of time. Is the past eternal? There are several positions there, no past, present, future, and how they relate to as sort of stretches of time. Whereas I think what motivates you and what you are interested in is sort of, again, we come to the same core, the knowledge of the past, knowledge of history, what happened with certain things which have a past or which develop historically. So is realism about the past, at least in some definition, something different than realism about history? Would it make sense to make the differentiation there, or is this something that is just not useful in your framework?
There is field, so to speak, actually very active debate about the ontology of time. I think that you had at least one lecture in the seminar.
Yes, right, yes.
Eternalist, presentist, moving
Exactly,
up.
yes.
This is something I wanted to skirt away from it. It is interesting to think, does any of their opinions about the ontology of time, does it dictate something about our knowledge of the past or about history? I'm not sure it does. The two debates seems to run in parallel and very rarely cross each other. So this is something entirely different from what we are talking now. I don't have anything to say about eternalism versus presentism in this sense. Dumet was kind of presentist, but again, not in the way that the people who talk about ontology of time do. So we are completely in the rhythm of historiography. This is our matter.
Yeah, but that's what I was trying to drive at. Would it then make more sense to speak about realism about history, whatever that then is? Or we also speak about historiographic realism, realism of the historical sciences, perhaps, instead of realism about the past, which is strongly connected to the question of time and philosophy of time. Or you cannot really cleave apart the past and history anyway. Whenever you talk about the one, you mean the other anyway as well. So it's hard to sort of get a good conceptual distinction there.
I think that we do talk about the past. We do say that, for example, the Himalayas were formed over such and such period of time by the collision of two plates. And this is something we learned. And as Avieza Tucker just thought, it is unlikely to be unsettled by pessimistic induction, by some new discoveries. It will be modified, perhaps refined, but we learned that this is about the past. It's not about just about our books and treatises.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't make a difference between realism of the past and of history.
Okay. Yeah, for me it would have been facts about history, not about the past. But we can discuss later if this makes sense to differentiate in that way. Or another time. Is there anybody else who would have a question, comment? We can also take up points that were before.
Can I
Jouni-Matti again? Yes.
Just continue this discussion a little bit, because I find it interesting just by hearing and sometimes listening to this phrase that the past is real. That I find it confusing, because as you say, if you don't go to this philosophy of time discussions, is eternalism and stuff like that. So if we are eternalists, if we did go, then it was real. Napoleon was still, riding his horse towards Russia and all the past. Well, that's wild. It's at least not common sense. And maybe it's true, but it's not common sense. And then the common sense view is that the past is not real. It's not there, because it's gone. There's nowhere. Past is nowhere, unless we go to eternalism again. So what's what do we mean? If you mean just that once upon a time there were people and buildings and they did things, fine, and that's common sense again. But they are not anymore.
No, not as far as I'm concerned. No, yeah. I really don't believe. I'm not sure even that eternalists, at least the more refined ones, say that the Napoleon is real in the sense that you are real. They don't as far as I can see, they don't understand this way. But again, the ontology of the time domain is a difficult question, and I was surprised to see that very few interactions are between people who are considering this problem and people who are considering this, are talking about historiography. And maybe it should be so. Maybe this split is justified. Even people who are presentist in the ontological sense, not in the way that Dumet was, do not say that your visit to the dentist last week was not. Yeah? The claim is different. So this visit is part of history, maybe not, in their opinion, not part of the real time. But this is, I hesitate to say the word orthogonal, but this debate runs in parallel to the debates in historiography, as far as I know.
Yeah.
Or is it elsewhere?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Is there anybody else? I mean, if not, we can also close it for today. It's not a problem, but I'll give everybody a chance still to ask a question. Oh, yeah, Josie again, please. Yes, Josie, did you raise your hand? Yes. Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
I'm
Please.
trying to return. Sorry. Again, thank you very, very much for the talk. And I guess it's a broader question, perhaps, but I suppose is that the examples that you gave belonged to the historical sciences, mostly, I think. So archaeology and I suppose paleontology. So I mean, there have been, I think, a lot of attempts now to sort of on the one hand, to defend the historical sciences, to defend the autonomy of the historical sciences against the theoretical sciences. And it seems to me that that's fair, that, that it doesn't mean that there are second-class citizens just because they're not fully experimental. They obviously have an experimental element, but they're not fully experimental. And on the other hand, I suppose there are also attempts to sort of fight the kind of relativism that has been in the, has possibly dominated the philosophy of historiography, by likening history in the sense in which most people mean history, like the history of Caesar and of Marco Polo and, to the historical sciences. And I think some of the reasons why that has been done is to reclaim a kind of objectivity to the method of historians. So where do you stand here? So do you, because in a way you seem to have drawn example from the historical sciences, are you committed to the claim that history is a historical science, or at least that all of the claim that historians make when they speak about the French revolutions and the American revolutions are like the historical sciences, so that there is, that history is autonomous, yes, but it is autonomous in the way in which I suppose geology and evolutionary biology are autonomous from physics? Or are you saying, oh, you're not pronouncing yourself on that? You say, well, I've just talked about this, So I just wonder where you stand on that. Is there a humanistic history which has a distinctive methodology from, the kind of method that is used, say, to determine the age of death, a death of the Denisovan girl? So do you think that, historians, as we normally mean, are historians in the sense in which, evolutionary biologists are historians?
The way I would formulate it is that when it comes to human history, where human intentionality and is involved, and when sometimes the nexus of causality can be interpreted in more than one way, then underdetermination will be more pervasive than in geology. Of course, every science has specific methodologies, but the question, what happened or can you understand, is the same. But because when we are talking about humans, things are involved that sometimes, not always, but sometimes are not amenable to clear determination. Underdetermination will be pervasive when you talk about. But I definitely do not think that everything about human history is narrative in the free-for-all sense. No, I don't think so. Some things are more established and some less.
Well, yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
We sometimes know about migrations and conflicts or even cultural forms, and sometimes we do not. But this is not, and this is related to the fact that questions involve human, but this doesn't mean, at least I will not say, that everything about human history is speculative. Some things are and some are not.
Right, I agree, but do you think that the sort of evidence... sorry? Okay, thank you. Thank you.
No, that was not me. I don't know who spoke. You can continue. I mean, David also wants to say something. Do you want to continue, Josie? Shortly.
I guess this is an extension of my question about cognitive archaeology, because there is a sense in which by when we analyze the Denisovan girl, when people extract DNA, or when they look at because they just found that little finger, a bit of a finger, didn't they? And they said, oh, she must have been an adolescent when she dies because the phalanges of the fingers were not fused yet. That is one kind of things that you come to know about humans, and we might come to know even more if we come across more, distant fossils of Denisovans. But the sort of and whether the knowledge that we have there is underdetermined depends on whether we will or will not find more fossils of Denisovans. But whether knowledge of what people normally call history can be underdetermined very often depends on a very different kind of trace, which is to say whether we can have documents, and if we do have them, whether we can understand them, whether we can translate them, and make sense of them. So my question is that really how much can you know really by the methods that are used in the historical sciences, by carbon dating, by extracting DNA about humans, and in what sense are you using the term human? Because I assume that we would not really, there is a principled barrier there that you wouldn't be able to know about the religious beliefs about the Denisovan girl by analyzing, her DNA and so on and so forth. So in a way, I agree with you about the fact that there is underdetermination doesn't mean that we cannot have knowledge, but I would say that there are different kinds of knowledge, and that I was just asking you, given that most of the examples that you gave were from the historical sciences, do you think that knowledge can really be extended, or whether, on the other hand, there is a different kind of humanistic knowledge that has to do with cultures, with belief system, with practices that are accessed in a different way by, accessing a different kind of evidence, which is not DNA, which is not carbon dating, which.
What I can say, I would formulate it this way. I think that we have a reason to be optimistic, but we need to be modest in a way, because we will sometimes find limitations that we will not be able to cross, or only to be, if we do it only speculatively. The works of Ranke are still valid, but he could get that far and not farther. And this is true to many other things. And of course, when you get to prehistory, the gamut of evidence, available evidence, is restricted more than about history.
Okay,
But
next
it is a combination of optimism and modesty that I think should characterize our relation to our understanding, perception of the historical sciences.
Okay, I think we have David next.
Thank you.
Go ahead a bit now.
Sorry, I'm not sure if I want to interrupt the discussion, because I think it's much more interesting than the questions I will have. That's why I was waiting for the very end. One question which is maybe slightly related to the realism and irrealism debate. How sure we are, how probable is it that the picture of Goldstein you had there is really a Goldstein? Because I have been always on the hand of his photo, but it's sort of a joke question. The second question, it would be also related to Goldstein. Where would you situate Goldstein's anti-realism? Because after reading through his books and papers many times, he has very strange and perhaps poorly articulated position, because on the one side he is a really strong anti-realist, but at the same time he has some strange, unclear optimism about our knowledge of the past. There are even sentences when he's saying that our knowledge of the past will approach real past, even though he's not unable to articulate how is it possible. So, is it possible that he was in some poorly articulated way a kind of epistemological anti-realist, but still realist about in some ontological or metaphysical way about the past?
Yes, I think it is. As I said, the way I understand realism is hierarchical. You cannot be metaphysically anti-realist and, in my opinion, and epistemology realist, but the other way around. You can, and in fact, Leon Goldstein, for example, was epistemically anti-realist with no problem about the metaphysics of the past.
Mhm. Okay.
I want to digress for a moment. One eminent physicist, Weinberg, Nobel Prize winner, wrote a book, The Search for a Final Theory. And as Abiyaza Tucker noted, the physics is not any near to final theory, but at the theoretical sciences, so to speak, this holy grail is possible at least as an ideal. One day, he was not alone. Yes, other people also say we just need to solve this and that, and we have a complete theory of physics. I'm not sure this is true, but this makes sense within the theoretical sciences. And in the historical sciences, what we learned is indeed more stable than many theoretical sciences, but we must reckon with the fact that there were things that may perhaps be important if we knew them, but we should never know. So this is a definite thing. There will no final theory of many aspects of the past. Because of unknown, because when human intentionality comes into play, the underdetermination can be enhanced.
Yes, is that satisfactory, David? Yes. Okay. I would have one more question if you allow. We can also then let's see if somebody else then also wants to. I was just wondering, do you think that the discussion on the underdetermination of the historical science or the epistemic success on the historical sciences is an example of what you were mentioning at the very end of your talk, of itself a discussion about an underdetermined hypothesis that got a lot of positive epistemic effects. Because I don't think that we can decide in very general terms the question of the epistemic success of the historical sciences, right? Well, I think this is maybe itself an underdetermined question, or it's itself an example of underdetermination, because we would have to know a lot of things about the epistemic abilities of future scientists, the question about the retention and destruction of information and so on, all of these things we don't know, right?
Yeah, but everybody, I think everybody agrees that the historical sciences have tremendous, very widespread success in many aspects. Yes, things that we were not understood maybe even 30 years ago are now fairly stable. On the other hand, there are things that, like the example of cognitive archaeology I gave, that include many things that perhaps we shall never know, as was said here. So the landscape of determination and underdetermination in historical sciences is a fragmented one. It is not homogeneous, and so if this is so, then to say the question which is often asked, are we optimistic, are we pessimistic, may not be the adequate. Yes, something will have a very, even sometimes quick and full success, and some will remain moving in a circle, for example. And the example I gave about the Indo-European languages and populations, if you go back from the Brother Grimm and before, yes, whenever people talked about it, there were several hypotheses, and there wasn't really any way to decide. And this is now changing before our eyes. So something do change and something do not. It is not a unique answer to your question. There is no unique answer.
And I think the debate that Derek Turner started in 2007 or whatever with his paper has given us progress on the question of the determination of the historical sciences, because people have started discussing it in a way that made us understand much more what is at stake, or how to answer that question.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, great. So final call. Is there any more comments? Otherwise, we'll draw it to a close. We've been discussing 90 minutes already, which is great.
Thank you.
Okay, if not, then I'll thank everybody of you very much again, and of course, mostly Ephraim. Thank you very much for your talk, and we'll reconvene on December 18th with a talk by Fons de Wolf. Thank you very much.